I'm lucky enough to live in a part of Canada where there's not that many natural disasters. But with that being said, I've never seen more rain than we've gotten in the last 3 to 4 weeks here. For those of you who've been watching for a while, you know that I filmed quite a few videos in Glenorchy Conservation Area, where I'm actually standing right now. And I was gonna film a different video today until I noticed how flooded 16 Mile Creek actually was. So with that being said, let's shift gears and let's talk about 5 ways that flooding can impact the ecology of this important ecosystem. Nestled in the heart of Oakville, Ontario, 16 Mile Creek is a cornerstone of local natural beauty and biodiversity. In the past few months, we've experienced more rainfall than at any time I've seen in the last 30 years that I've been here. This intense rain has transformed the creek from a tranquil stream into a powerful force, reshaping its banks and impacting everything in its path. Today, we'll explore what these dramatic changes mean for the creek and the surrounding ecosystem. So first of all, we're going to think about habitat. Floods cause water levels to surge, submerging trees, shrubs, and all the underbush that many small mammals and birds depend on for shelter. This sudden change forces wildlife to flee their habitats, often leading to increased mortality and loss of biodiversity. All these mammals and birds that are present in the Glenorchy Conservation Area also depend on complex niches and available habitats, also known as habitat heterogeneity. Flooding inherently takes away a lot of that heterogeneity and homogenizes the ecosystem, reducing that complexity and making it harder for a diversity of species to actually occupy the area or the ecosystem that's here. Next, let's talk about water quality degradation. As the waters rise, they carry with them a toxic mix of pesticides, oil from roads, and other urban pollutants that significantly degrade water quality. This not only directly affects fish populations and other aquatic species, but also amphibians and the plants and insects that they feed on. As the water levels rise and they make more contact with the banks that normally are dry, all this erosion can seep into the waterway, and all these nutrients from local farmlands and roads can spill and create this toxic sludge that's being dispersed throughout 16 Mile Creek that otherwise may not have made it into the waterway. Next, let's talk about biodiversity. The ecological balance of 16 Mile Creek is inherently at risk. Native species struggle to survive amid changing conditions, while invasive species find new opportunities to thrive. This shift can lead to long-term impacts on the creek's biodiversity. And this is inherently tied to point number 1, where we're having these intense, uncharacteristic events like flooding, increased heat, windstorms that are affecting the typical routines that native species are accustomed to. They typically bloom at the same time every year, or they breed at the same time every year, and these sharp disruptions are altering the routines that have been built over generation and generation, reducing their ability to fill the niches they've occupied for so long. And this opens up the opportunity for invasive species to come in and fill those unoccupied niches. Next, we're going to talk about something that's definitely near and dear to my heart, soil. Specifically, soil erosion and sedimentation. So erosion strips the riverbanks of their soil, which is then deposited as sediment further down the creek. This sedimentation can bury fish eggs and smother aquatic plant life, crucial components of our aquatic ecosystems. And these erosion events are significantly important when we consider things like the ability of soils to store carbon. So carbon storage is one of the main ecosystem services that we rely on when it comes to soil, and increased amounts of erosion due to flooding can significantly alter the ability of this soil to store carbon long term through this increased disturbance brought on by the higher water levels. Finally, let's talk about ecological connectivity. Flooding often rearranges the very course of the creek, creating new waterways while isolating old ones. This disrupts ecological pathways through which species migrate, feed, and reproduce, leading to fragmented populations. And if you remember from previous videos, we've actually talked about the impact that habitat fragmentation can have on wildlife populations. But that was all from a human-induced perspective. This is brought on by natural disturbance from the higher water levels and faster flow of the current. This still creates these isolated populations, which can have significant negative consequences on wildlife populations, especially fish and amphibians in this case. So what we're seeing here at 60 Mile Creek is definitely not unique in the global context or even in my local context of Ontario, Canada. We're seeing increased disturbance regimes happening everywhere due to the impacts of climate change and anthropogenic impacts. The reality is that these natural disturbances are happening more frequently and more severely. And we have to make sure we find a balance between taking a preventative approach and thinking about how to mitigate the impacts of these disturbances, and also taking a reactive approach and coming up with ways to support the ecosystems, people, and populations that are impacted by these increased disturbance regimes. So while this flooding is an example of the impact of climate change and natural disturbances in my local area, I'd definitely love to hear about what kinds of changes or natural disturbances you or your local ecosystems have been experiencing over the last few years, and how it's impacted both you or wildlife or the area around you in general. Please leave a comment below, and I'd love to hear your stories. And if you enjoyed this quick look at the impact of disturbance in my local area, please like the video for more content like this every week, and consider subscribing to the channel for more environmental stories every single week. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.